All right, I see folks are still trickling in, but for the sake of time, I'm going to go ahead and kick us off and get started. Hopefully you are here for the On-Road Freight Electrification webinar. Today, we're going to be talking about policy options for states. And before we dive into today's presentations, I'm just going to give a quick background on NASEO and this project. If you're not familiar, NASEO is the National Association of State Energy Officials. We are the only national nonprofit association for the governor-designated energy officials from each of the 56 states and territories. My name is Jessie Lund. I am our Clean Transportation Program Director, and I'm joined today by Delaney Dixon, also on our transportation team here at NASEO. Thanks for being here, Delaney. NASEO works across a wide variety of program areas. As I mentioned, today we're going to be talking about transportation and specifically about freight electrification. This is a major topic these days. I want to spend just a couple minutes mentioning some of the news that's come out around freight electrification just over the last month or so. We've seen a lot of new guidance from the federal government. For one, we have seen the Joint Office of Energy and Transportation release the National Zero-Emission Freight Corridor Strategy, March 12th, so just about a month ago. That same day, the Federal Highway Administration designated their freight EV corridors. So these are meant to pair nicely together, but just to give you a sense of where we expect freight electrification to take off first, and specifically where charging infrastructure will be needed to support these vehicles first. Also from the federal arena, we saw the EPA finalize the Phase 3 rule of the heavy-duty greenhouse gas regulation just a few weeks ago. So if you haven't seen that news, check that out. I also want to notice, I mentioned charging infrastructure. There has been a lot of momentum in this space. Just over the last month, we've seen a huge number of announcements for new charging depots, as well as new charging depots actually opening. You can see this ribbon cutting in the bottom right from the WattEV San Bernardino site just yesterday. All of these sites mentioned here are all focused on medium and heavy duty freight vehicles. So lots happening in this space. And luckily, there's also increasing funding to support this build out. So I want to call out just a couple open opportunities right now, both at the federal level. The first that's been open for probably at least a month or two at this point is the EPA has their Clean Ports program open right now. There's $3 billion on the table for this one-time opportunity, and applications are due May 28th. I also want to mention this new funding opportunity announced just yesterday by the Joint Office of Energy and Transportation. They announced $54 million for this community's program, and concept papers are required if you're looking to apply for this funding. Those will be due in about a month on May 20th. Again, lots happening here. NASEO is playing in this space through this freight electrification project, specifically focused on on-road freight electrification, so trucks, delivery vans, etc. And there's really three key components of this project and the work that we're undertaking with states. The first is that we're working to analyze the challenges and understand the impacts and needs around freight electrification. This virtual discussion series is one way that we're doing that. So we'll be continuing this discussion series. We've also already hosted one webinar that was a part of this series in late 2023, which will be available on the website here in probably the next couple days. The second component of our work on on-road freight electrification is helping states figure out how they can leverage those public funding opportunities and private sector investments. So we will be working with 2 to 3 states over the next year to help them really plan for freight electrification and develop action plans, bring together stakeholders, etc. That leads us into coalition building along key corridors. I shared those corridors that the federal government has highlighted here at the beginning. We hope to work with states that are along those Phase 1 corridors to develop those action plans I mentioned, bring together the stakeholders within their state, and help develop resources that can help those states as well as others figure out how to leverage these funding opportunities going forward as we all look to figure out how to support and accelerate freight electrification. So that said, I do want to acknowledge just real quick, we have an amazing advisory group that is working with us on this project, ensuring that we're getting the best resources and speakers like through this webinar series. We're trying to answer these key questions through this virtual discussion series, help states figure out, where and how many freight charging hubs will be needed in the near term. What are the anticipated electric system needs, timelines, and costs for ensuring adequate electric service to those freight charging hubs that we just talked about are popping up increasingly across the country? We want to help states understand how they can advance plan for public freight charging, whether that's at NEVI sites or other publicly funded charging locations, and also how additional public funding can be leveraged to spur additional private sector investment in this space. That brings us to our topic today. We heard a lot of questions from states around what policies are out there, both kind of in the regulatory mandate space, but also some more programmatic kind of market-driven options. What can states really be doing to help advance freight electrification? And so today we're lucky enough to be joined by two of the foremost experts on this space. We will be hearing first from Jeremy Hunt, who's a policy advisor with NESCAUM. And we will also hear from Stacey Simms, who is Senior Director of Clean Fuels and Infrastructure at CALSTART. So with that said, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I will turn it over to Jeremy, who will be our first speaker. While he pulls up his slides, I will just say we will save time at the end for questions and answers, just a nice discussion after both presentations, but feel free to put your question in the Q&A box as it comes to you so you don't forget. We'll come back around to those. And I will also just note that today's session is being recorded. So if any of your colleagues would like to view a recording, that will be available afterwards as well. With that, Jeremy, I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Jesse, for the introduction and the invitation to participate in this conversation about on-road freight electrification and talking about how the Advanced Clean Trucks regulation and other state policy options are driving the medium and heavy-duty ZEV market forward. So for those unfamiliar, just want to provide a really quick background on my organization. It is the Northeast States for Coordinated Air Use Management, also known as NESCAUM. We are a small nonprofit regional association of state air quality agencies located in the Northeast with our 8 member states shown on screen. And we provide a wide range of scientific, technical, and policy support to our states on air quality and climate change issues. We have a long history of collaborating with other states, federal agencies, and the automotive industry to promote low and zero emission vehicles. And I just want to mention that we also develop and lead and facilitate a number of multi-state initiatives. A couple that I'll mention are the NESCAUM Mobile Sources Committee, which is a technical work group that brings together Section 177 states to coordinate on the adoption and implementation of California's motor vehicle standards. And the second is the multi-state ZEV task force, which brings together dozens of representatives from energy, environmental, and transportation agencies in more than 20 states across the US to coordinate on ZEV policy development and implementation. The task force is a unique forum for galvanizing state leadership on ZEV policy through research and analysis, peer-to-peer exchange, and coordinated action on shared priorities, such as the development of complementary policies. And we'll get into that in just a bit. The next series of slides, I think mostly everyone knows, but I do just want to cover these briefly because I think they're helpful for level setting on the need to electrify the medium and heavy duty vehicle sector. Medium and heavy duty trucks account for 5%, very small share of on-road vehicles in the US. However, they run primarily on diesel fuel and they log the highest annual VMT any on-road vehicle class. At more than 23,000 vehicle miles traveled per year, medium and heavy duty trucks travel twice as many miles as the average light duty vehicle. And moreover, truck VMT is projected to grow into the future due to the rapid growth in e-commerce and the delivery of consumer goods. And as you all know, the transportation sector is the largest source of greenhouse gases in the United States. Within this sector, Medium and heavy duty vehicles account for nearly 1/4 of all emissions. And I'll just mention, if the US and individual states are to meet their climate change commitments, we must rapidly transition to widespread vehicle electrification, and in this discussion, electric trucks. Medium and heavy duty vehicles are also responsible for almost 60% of on-road NOx emissions and more than half of on-road fine particulate matter emissions. And the impacts of these emissions and pollution are much more heavily felt in frontline and overburdened communities located in close proximity to freight and distribution hubs, transport corridors, and port facilities. As such, the deployment of zero-emission trucks is a crucial strategy for improving public health and reducing emissions of these criteria pollutants that exacerbate asthma and other cardiorespiratory illnesses. So now we get into more of the meat and the potatoes of my presentation, which is talking about how the Advanced Clean Trucks regulation is driving freight electrification in the near term. So California's ACT regulation is not the first ZEV sales regulation adopted by the state. That distinction goes to the first ZEV regulation as part of their light duty, low emission vehicle program in 1990. And over these last 30 years, the ZEV regulation has been modified to reflect the state of technology advancement and has effectively laid the groundwork for the Advanced Clean Trucks regulation by forcing unprecedented investments and improvements in zero emission technologies. Shortly put, the ZEV regulation helped put us on the path toward ZEV commercialization and enabled automakers to offer more reliable and affordable ZEVs to consumers. And now the ACT regulation aims to do the same for medium and heavy duty trucks. And since we're focusing on freight electrification today, I won't cover the most recent light duty ZEV sales requirements under ACC 2, but I do want to call your attention to the lower left chart comparing ZEV and plug-in hybrid electric vehicle sales in Section 177 ZEV states to non-ZEV states. As you can see, in 2023, the market share in the Section 177 ZEV states was nearly double that of non-ZEV states. And not only have most of these states adopted the ZEV regulation, they've also implemented a variety of complementary policies, such as vehicle purchase incentives, charging infrastructure grant programs, and EV-ready building codes to support a more rapid transition to EVs. And transitioning directly to the Advanced Clean Trucks regulation, I will point out that states have a long history of exercising their right under Section 177 of the Clean Air Act to adopt California motor vehicle emission standards in lieu of the federal standards. And the states do this for a number of reasons to address air quality problems and climate change. And some states, they have broad existing statutory authority to adopt ACT, while others may need to enact legislation authorizing ACT adoption. But what is the ACT regulation? So most importantly, this is a manufacturer sales requirement and not a fleet purchase requirement. The regulation requires manufacturers to produce and deliver for sale an increasing number of electric trucks through 2035. The big way this regulation differs from EPA's recent Phase 3 GHG regulation is it guarantees that states adopting ACT will see an increasing minimum supply of zero-emission trucks in their state. And this helps provide certainty for truck manufacturers while also expanding purchasing options for fleets. And then lastly, I won't spend much time on it, but the regulation uses a straightforward credit deficit system where manufacturers generate deficits for internal combustion engines sold, and manufacturers generate credits for zero-emission vehicles sold. Manufacturers are in compliance with the regulation when they possess credits equal to their annual deficit, which is based on the number of vehicles sold in an ACT state. And I'll move ahead where we can look at the ZEV sales requirements and the vehicles that are subject to those requirements. So the ACT regulation applies to sales of new Class B through 8 vehicles with a gross vehicle weight rating greater than 8,500 pounds. These increasing ZEV sales requirements are set out in 3 buckets. Those are Class 2B3 non-tractors, Class 4 through 8 non-tractors, and Class 7-8 tractors. You can view some of the example vehicles listed. And beginning in model year 2024, medium and heavy duty manufacturers are required to deliver these increasing shares of ZEVs out to the model year 2035. The requirements begin with 5% for Class 2B3 trucks and Class 7 through 8 tractors, and the requirements for Class 4 through 8 non-tractors begin at 9% in model year 2024. In model year 2032, Class 7-8 tractor requirements flatline at 40% ZEV sales, and the Class 4 through 8 and 2B3 vehicles continue increasing out to 2035, ultimately landing at 75% for Class 4 through 8 non-tractors and 55% ZEV sales for Class 2B3 non-tractors. CARB set these requirements based on their analysis of medium and heavy duty market development, product announcements, and OEM investments in ZEV technologies. And I'll just note that many of these trucks travel interstate, and this level of rapid electrification will necessitate proactive electric grid planning and development to support these new charging loads in both ACT states and the neighboring states that these trucks are going to be traveling through. So just because your state hasn't adopted ACT does not mean you won't see these electric trucks on your roads. Also want to spend just a few moments here talking about the critical regulatory certainty provided by the ACT ZEV sales requirements. So they help provide regulatory certainty to support a stable market for long-term vehicle purchasing decisions and the development of medium and heavy-duty charging solutions. These vehicles are coming, and fleets generally electrify as it makes economic sense. But if your state has adopted ACT, you will see guaranteed volumes of increasing vehicles as required by the ZEV sales requirements. That guaranteed supply of EVs provides certainty for utilities to develop programs to support the deployment of make-ready charging infrastructure, offer fleet assessment services, and develop innovative time-of-use rates and other program offerings that accelerate fleet electrification. It also provides certainty for utility regulators to approve those program offerings. And lastly, the ACT ZEV sales requirements will drive investments in medium and heavy-duty ZEV technologies and the refueling infrastructure needed to support them. And as the number of states adopting ACT grows, it sends a stronger signal to manufacturers to build a more sustainable electric truck market, but also that they can make their investments in charging infrastructure networks such as the PACT coalition recently formed by Volvo, Daimler, and Navistar, which aims to grow the public charging network for electric trucks. So here we want to take a quick look at the status of ACT adoption across the US. And to date, 11 states have adopted the regulation, all shown here in green. Together, these states represent more than a quarter of all heavy-duty registrations in the United States. And there's also states shown in blue here that are signatories to the 2020 Medium and Heavy-Duty ZEV Memorandum of Understanding. And this MOU commits these states to work together to achieve 30% medium and heavy-duty ZEV sales by 2030 and 100% ZEV sales no later than 2050. And some of these states may consider future adoption of the ACT regulation. So we do have some early data coming out of California and wanted to give you a quick look into how the ZEV, medium and heavy duty ZEV market is taking shape in that state. So statewide manufacturers are on track to exceed the model year 2024 ZEV sales requirements a full 2 years early. These data we're looking at refer to early action credits or credits earned for zero-emission trucks sold in California prior to the regulation taking effect. And if you average out the 3 sales categories under ACT, the ZEV sales requirement in model year 2024 is about 6% of total annual sales. But based on the data from sales reporting in 21 to 2022, 7.5% of all new medium heavy-duty vehicles sold in California were ZEVs. Several manufacturers have already earned enough ZEV credits that are needed to comply with the regulation by the end of model year 2024. And if you're curious, we are talking about over 104,000 ZEVs sold in 2022. And to me, that demonstrates 2 things: that these ZEV sales targets are achievable with the right mix of complementary policies and programs in place, and that the ACT regulations will be strong near-term drivers of freight electrification. And due to that, states need to work with utilities to prepare the electric grid to handle these large new charging loads. But as we saw in the last slide, California is not alone in driving this market forward. And I just have a couple slides left. I briefly want to touch on some of the key complementary policies for building a sustainable medium and heavy duty ZEV market, and in particular, those highlighted in the medium and heavy duty ZEV action plan NESCAUM worked with the states to release in July 2022. This action plan was prompted by the 2020 medium and heavy duty ZEV memorandum of understanding I mentioned earlier, which has now been signed by 17 states, the District of Columbia, and the province of Quebec. And overall, the action plan contains more than 65 recommendations for policymakers to consider for rapidly and equitably transitioning the market to medium and heavy duty ZEVs. Some of these action areas are shown on screen, and I'll just call out the ZEV sales requirements such as ACT, adopting ZEV purchase requirements such as California's Advanced Clean Fleets Regulation, implementing purchase incentives for trucks and infrastructure, supporting utility investments in charging infrastructure, and developing innovative programs to help fleets transition, as well as strategic coordination on regional corridors for freight and travel. And since the release of the action plan in July 2022, the ZEV task force members have been hard at work designing and implementing new complementary policies to help accelerate this transition to electric trucks. And here we do see some of those examples of complementary policies that states are busy implementing. So several states have offered purchase incentives for medium and heavy duty ZEVs, and more programs are in development. I listed the California HVIP program here, which is in a few iterations now, but they have specific funding lanes for electric trucks, transit buses, school buses, drayage trucks, and even smaller owner-operator fleets. States are also providing financial incentives to support the deployment of medium and heavy duty ZEV charging infrastructure. And a good example is the Oregon zero-emission fueling infrastructure program. It's a grant pilot program that works to fund charging infrastructure and utility improvements at medium and heavy duty charging sites. A number of states also have medium and heavy duty focused utility proceedings and make-ready infrastructure programs underway. I'll just call your attention to New York State's statewide make-ready program, which provides funding for light and heavy duty make-ready charging infrastructure. And last year, the state's Public Service Commission expanded the overall program budget from $701 million to $1 billion, while increasing the budget for medium and heavy duty make-ready to $67 million. And then lastly, a number of states and even some utilities are busy offering fleet advisory and technical service programs to help fleet operators understand the ins and outs of transitioning their fleets to electric. The Massachusetts Fleet Advisor program connects Massachusetts-based fleets with technical consultants to design customized electrification plans. And that takes me to my last slide. And I just want to end by saying there's a lot of momentum rapidly building in the freight electrification space. By the end of 2023, there were more than 218 medium and heavy duty ZEV models available for purchase in North America. And the ZEV sales requirements and EPA's Phase 3 GHG regulations will continue to spur new ZEV technology investments. Battery pack prices are forecasted to continue declining, helping to improve the economics of truck electrification. And on the federal side, the Inflation Reduction Act is providing significant federal incentives for the purchase of heavy-duty zero-emission vehicles and funding charging infrastructure investments. And then recently, the federal government announced a national zero-emission freight corridor strategy to connect freight and distribution hubs along corridors. And this phased-in plan will prioritize states that have policies like the ACT in place, and some of these complementary policies that I mentioned. This significant influx of public funding, private investment, and supportive complementary policies creates a foundation in which the ACT ZEV sales requirements and ZEV adoption projections from EPA Phase 3 are achievable, but it also creates a really strong need for states to proactively prepare the electric grid for the rapid and widespread electrification of trucks. So thank you for your time, and I do look forward to the Q&A.
Thank you so much, Jeremy. I am going to share my screen again, and we are going to hear from our second and final speaker today. Stacey, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Jesse, and thank you, Jeremy, for an excellent presentation. First of all, just to get us started, thank you, Jesse and NASEO, for the opportunity to talk a little bit about some other options that are available for the medium and heavy duty market development. I'm going to start us off with some key reminders when working in this space, and then I'm going to preview something that we're working on here at CALSTART, which is our 8 key success policy factors. I won't have time to talk about each of them, but I'm going to highlight 3 of those that I think may be best suited for this audience here. So Jesse, if you can move on to the slide here. At CALSTART, our mission and vision, we really believe that we want the mobility that sustains the planet's climate and provides healthy lives for all of its inhabitants. And you'll see here our mission is to work with innovation partners to accelerate the growth of the clean transportation industry. CALSTART, we are an industry builder, and with over 300 members who are active in this space, we have quite the opportunity to make a change for good in transportation. So Jesse, if you can move to the next slide. Thank you. So second, I just want to applaud everyone on this call for your interest, your passion, and your work in bringing forward zero-emission transportation, especially in the freight and logistics sector. This is tough work. Bravo, and thank you for the work that you are all doing. I started working in the space in the early 2000s, actually 2006. At the Governor's Energy Office in Colorado. And I have to tell you, I am so inspired and excited about all the momentum and opportunities that I see in the zero emission transportation sector. With that, though, I do want to set up a few key reminders. The efforts that you are making are worth it. We are in a marathon and not a sprint. And when we think about the opportunities of what states can do, it really takes all of government approach. You're seeing that now at the federal level, where with the national freight corridor strategy, with the emphasis from the Biden administration, they've really taken this all of government approach. And states are also in a great position to do that by bringing in various agencies to provide their subject matter expertise and their data. You really can make this something that is not just carried by one group, but it is brought across the whole state. And as they say, many hands lighten the load. And no matter what state you are working in, there is always something to do. Whether you want to start with an executive order, or you are already signed up as a signatory for an MOU, or you have incentives and other policies in place. By starting and continuing to build your momentum, you are signaling the value and you're signaling the market that there is an open space and an invitation to work in your state. So moving on to the next slide. And Jesse, thank you so much for your technology support here. In California, CALSTART is leading a more than 50 participant-wide roundtable where we're focusing on zero-emission transportation challenges. This is one of the slides that came from that roundtable. And what I've done is gone ahead and indicated here with red circles those areas which, in our opinion, the states can really have the greatest impact and influence. And they are utility coordination, infrastructure funding and high project cost reduction, AHJ and jurisdictional coordination, regulatory and policy changes and signaling, and addressing changing landscapes in the market. Moving on then to the next slide. I'm really glad this will be available to all of you because there's some great other pieces that you'll see within that slide. And it is a great summary of what these participants in California have put together. We're also sharing it nationally for others to bring forward in their working groups. What I'm previewing here is part of a larger effort that's being developed by CALSTART, including our policy and regulatory teams, as well as my team working on the infrastructure side. These are key factors that offer a range of possible actions that states can choose to take. Each are critical steps and is important for states to at least start taking minimum actions to stay on track for the pace of progress that they wish to see and the success they want. So I don't have time to go through all of the 8, but you'll see them in the slides here, and feel free to contact me if you would like to go through these more in depth or have a conversation with our policy team. So as I mentioned before, these are 8 key factors, and we do show them in kind of a priority list to some extent, also in a sequential order, but you'll notice that many of these need to be performed in parallel, or like we'll get to one here on planning, it just is best done continuously. So what we've tried to do is kind of lay out a framework from which you can do 8 things just to get started, and knowing that up to you and your state how you actually want to move forward in implementing these. So I'm going to focus on this slide here with 2. And the first one is setting a target, and the other one is organizing and engaging. So really, when we talk about setting a target, you must start with where your state is, taking in consideration the politics, the financial condition of your state, and really figuring out what aligns out of these 8 steps that aligns to your state, but then also helps prioritize what is most important for you, whether that be an executive order or an MOU, or starting with something and just signing up for work that's already been done in other states. By starting and documenting and sharing what you want to accomplish, you're signaling to the market that there's an opportunity for zero emission freight market development in your state. So I'm going to give you an example here of just how the momentum builds momentum. So 17 years ago today in Colorado, Governor Ritter established the first greening government executive order. That executive order required a 25% volumetric reduction in petroleum consumption, and he ordered a audit of the efficiency of the state fleet and looking at how environmental benefits could be achieved by including alternative fuels and petroleum reduction in state fleet. He was aligning it essentially to air quality attainment and air quality plans. In less than 3 years, that executive order not only did decrease and reach their goal of petroleum reduction, but also provided a lead by example moment within Colorado that then continued to spur additional actions, momentum, investments. And it brought a lot of transparency and visibility to zero emission vehicles in Colorado. And as Jeremy showed in his slide there, Colorado has since adopted the ACT. It continues to lead in the electrification incentives that are available really across all classes, and has really rapidly moved into the medium heavy duty zero emission policy. All of this just started with an executive order. So no matter where you are, setting a target, documenting it, putting it out, letting people know that this is what your state is open to do, it builds momentum, and that momentum is so important in this sector. Another one I want to focus on here is that engage and organize. Back to the idea of all of government. Starting with an executive order, you do start to get alignment within the state. You start leveraging the knowledge and plans and the requirements at a state level. You also get to find out who are your subject matter experts. And again, it lightens the load of all the work that needs to be done. But it's also important to make sure that you're involving your utilities in your state and your communities very early on. I cannot stress this. I worked both at an energy office and I worked for a large investor-owned utility. And in every conversation I ever had about electrification, especially of medium and heavy duty, we always say you have to start talking and planning with your utility early. So understanding how you, by stating what you want to do and help the utilities and community understand their opportunities, you're signaling the path for collaboration and coordination. Also, too, I really encourage each of you to look at the National Zero Emission Freight Corridor. Jesse put it up before. That roadmap really does lay out the opportunities in a very planned, strategic way in which we can build out medium and heavy duty charging. Not everywhere at once. That's not what we need within the industry right now, but in a very planned way. So I do encourage you, if you haven't looked at that, to look at that roadmap and see what the opportunities are within your state. Moving on to the next one. So again, really, we really do believe that all of these steps are important, but I wanted to just bring your attention to the development of incentive programs. You'll see here listed a number of different ways that this can be brought forward. We do know that the point of sale vouchers are the premier approach in spurring incentive development within the states. Jeremy did mention the HVIP program. HVIP is actually managed by CALSTART. It is a really great opportunity to provide vouchers to reduce the cost of hybrid and electric trucks and buses. HVIP also offers higher incentives for trucks that operate in disadvantaged communities. What's great about this is it has set-asides for transit, school, drayage, and small fleets, so that each of the various medium and heavy-duty sectors has an opportunity to go forward and receive vouchers within this program. Currently, there's $401 million that are available in this program. Another one that I wanted to focus on is a CALSTART program that we administer, and that's Energize. So while HVIP really spurs the market by putting vouchers for the vehicles, Energize provides reimbursements for infrastructure projects in California that deploy zero-emission charging and refueling, really supporting medium and heavy-duty vehicles. So it's really focused on 2B through 8. There are also set-asides for drayage and hydrogen actually opens today. So just quick shout out to our team who's put that together, and the hydrogen lane is open for projects to apply right now. To date, we've awarded more than 184 projects with over 2,300 chargers in California. About $105 million has been used to spur the market. And last week, the California Energy Commission voted to increase our program from $276 million to $544 million. So when we look at this, having incentives that both address the truck and also the infrastructure, it really is a way to holistically incentivize the medium and heavy duty market. CALSTART is also working with Washington to do something similar in their incentive programs, and we're really excited about that opportunity moving forward. So if we can go to the last slide here, Jesse. So with all that being said, want to leave you here with a little bit of inspiration. Been working in the space, like I said, for almost 2 decades now, and along the way, it is just important to remember that this work is very, very important. And I think there's no more important place than at our state energy offices and working with the state energy officials. So with that, I just want to leave you with this great quote of, "I am not afraid of the storms, for I am learning how to set my sail." And I think all of us working in the zero emission transportation sector, we really are learning how to set our sail. So with that, I have one more slide here just on what is about CALSTART and my email and my LinkedIn if everyone would like to reach out. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Stacey. Really appreciate it. Appreciate both presenters today. That was a ton of great information that we've covered in quite a short amount of time. So I'm sure there are questions. I see we already have some coming through. Please feel free to type your questions into the Q&A box and we'll be sure to get to them. The first question here, I think maybe for Jeremy, but Stacey, feel free to chime in too, was how does ACT, Advanced Clean Trucks, compare with the EPA's latest rule on greenhouse gas emission standards for heavy-duty vehicles? Will the EPA rule make ACT redundant, or should states still be looking to adopt ACT? Jeremy, I think you touched on this a bit with that smaller graph, but sell us on why states should still consider adopting ACT.
Sure, and it's a great question. So the EPA's federal standards set a baseline for emissions that may increase the overall supply of clean vehicles as manufacturers produce more to meet these fleet rules. We do look at them as fleet average emission requirements. The ACT ZEB sales requirements go further by requiring a certain percentage of clean vehicles to be sold in each state annually. So only by adopting the ACT requirements can a state guarantee that they'll see zero emission trucks available for purchase in their state. which effectively locks in really significant emissions reductions and increases fleet's overall choice of clean trucks. And I'll just mention that EPA's modeling for the phase 3 rule assumed a ZEV penetration rate of 50% vocational vehicles in 2032, 35% for short haul tractors, and 25% for long haul tractors. The ACT regulation requires 60% vocational vehicles in 2032 and 40% ZEV tractors in 2032. So in short, the ACT regulation does provide greater emissions reductions than the phase 3 rule, but that's not to say the phase 3 rule is not important. It's a really positive step forward for the country as these trucks travel interstate. So cleaning up these trucks registered in states that have not adopted ACT will benefit all of the areas where these trucks travel.
Thank you, Jeremy. Great answer. So it sounds like, yes, still consider adopting ACT. It will push the whole country further beyond even what EPA is requiring and will ensure that your state itself sees the benefits from electrifying these vehicles. We also had a question for Stacey around providing a reference for the executive order out of Colorado that provided that momentum for change that she spoke about. For those interested, Stacey did already post a link to the original executive order that's in the Q&A box. I invite everyone to continue submitting your questions through the Q&A box. In the meantime, I've got a couple of questions for our presenters. My first one is, I think you both mentioned make-ready programs from utilities. I'm not sure everyone on the line is familiar with what a make-ready program is. So if you could provide just a quick overview of what that means, as well as how states should think about working with their PUCs and utilities to enable that sort of program, that would be very much appreciated.
Sure. Jeremy, I can take this one first. So a make-ready program, I think, is a fantastic way to have the utilities support and work with infrastructure development. So each state has a different flavor. Each utility actually has a different flavor as well. In many instances, what it is permission from the utility through the Public Utilities Commission, either through a transportation electrification plan or something else through policy, that allows for the utility to make an investment. Again, every utility has a slightly different flavor, to do from meter to pole the upgrades that are required for electrification. In some instances, like I believe in Colorado within the Excel Energy program, I believe it goes from the pole all the way down to the stub where the charger is dropped. In other utilities, it's from the pole to the meter box. Again, every state has a different flavor, but oftentimes that is one of the most expensive parts of the project that needs to be done. And rather than putting it on the site developer or the user, the utilities actually assume those costs. It becomes part of their investment strategy. They, kind of earn off of it the way that they do with many of their other investments in CapEx. So that at a high level is what a make-ready program is. And I can tell you from being on the other end as when I was working for a national DC fast charging network, we always targeted utility programs that had make ready and had some type of demand incentive, which Jesse, I don't know if we want to talk about as well, but those were
that was going to be my next question. So yeah, if you want to touch on some of the rate-based considerations around freight electrification, I think demand charges and maybe even time of use rates, just a quick overview would be great. Thank you.
Yeah, you bet. And so oftentimes states and other people who want to incentivize the market are looking at, and rightly so, upfront CapEx costs and how to bring those down. Right on that slide I showed, one of the concerns from the industry is high cost of projects. But I think there also needs to be consideration of that continuous operational cost that are incurred by projects and by fleets. So whether it's charging as a service or fleet as a service, someone has to pay for the electricity that's being generated. and are used on site. When we look at one of the key components of the cost, the ongoing cost for electrification, it's demand charges. And there's various ways to look at demand charges, but I just think of it as how much that site is using all at once, right? And oftentimes the demand charge will keep projects from moving forward because that charge can make up 60, 70, 80% of the bill. And when we think about the way that operators, fleets, charging as a service, fleet as a service, look around their business, the decision to build or not build often will come down to demand charges. Time of use is also another consideration. So time of use has varying price throughout the day based upon what the cost of generation is on the utility system at that time. In some places, you'll have very high peaks in afternoon, and sometimes in other instances at afternoon, early morning may have very low cost because there's more renewable and solar online. So it's really important for utilities to get that pricing right. But if you think about fleet operators or charging as a service, developers and businesses, they don't really fully have that transparency into the market. So time of use and the impact it has on the bill doesn't always align to how fleets operate. So what we have seen over the last, especially 5 to 7 years, is utilities are starting to now gather the data from medium and heavy duty fleets to say, okay, so we know our system performs this way, but then how do the needs of the fleets align or not align? And looking at very specific rates that can benefit large zero emission infrastructure projects. So I hope, Jesse, that was an answer you're looking for.
That was great. Thank you so much. And yeah, really appreciate the description of both. I think the time of use thing that you noted, there are technological solutions. So I just want to flag, like, for example, if you're a fleet, all your vehicles tend to get back around 5 p.m. or something. Maybe that's the peak time, the highest demand time for your local utility. So they don't want to start charging then, but the drivers need to plug them in before they leave. That's where software, like charge management software, can come into play. And from the state perspective, I think then we're really thinking about, as you're developing your incentive programs, like what both Jeremy and Stacey talked about, if you are developing incentive programs for charging, maybe that's something you want to consider, adding bonus points for applications that include that sort of charge management, or awarding additional funding to cover those costs, that sort of thing. Jeremy, anything you want to add on make-ready programs or utility rates and tariffs?
Yeah, I'd love to just add briefly that when, considering make-ready programs, utilities and their regulators need to factor in state climate change commitments, as well as the ZEV sales requirements under Advanced Clean Cars 2 and Advanced Clean Trucks. Essentially, if a utility can forecast or expect large new charging loads, it should lead to more efficient and proactive grid planning. So whether it's upgrading the grid and deploying new substations or transformers, basically just conducting site upgrades before that ZEV penetration hits the grid is always going to be helpful. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate that. If anyone has additional questions, please go ahead and throw those into the Q&A box. Otherwise, I'll proceed with my questions. One other topic I was hoping we could dive in on a little bit more is the different types of charging infrastructure that we're seeing states start to invest in. My sense is a lot of what's been funded to date has been kind of private, behind the fence depot charging for fleets. That's because a lot of the freight vehicles that have been electrified to date are doing more of these urban or regional return to base routes where they can just put charging in at their depot, at their warehouse, distribution center, whatever it is, and oftentimes charge overnight relatively slowly, sometimes even with just level 2 charging. When we think about that national zero emission freight corridor strategy that I put up at the beginning that Stacey mentioned, that we're really starting to get into more long haul or even longer regional routes that are going to require more on route charging. We can't rely on those trucks just coming back to the same base every evening. That will likely be higher power charging. But there's also an ownership change there where it wouldn't be one fleet or one company investing in that infrastructure. It might be multiple investing together, or perhaps even a charging developer like some of those that I mentioned at the beginning under all the news of the last month, whether it's the Watt EVs or the Zeems of the world, the Forum Mobilities, who are using private investment to build these charging hubs that private fleets can then use. Could either of you, Stacey and Jeremy, share a little bit about how the incentive programs that you've seen states put out to date kind of give maybe different funding lanes or rounds to those different types of ownership structures or charging sites? Stacey wants to know if you want to start, Jeremy.
Jeremy, I've spoken a lot so far. Go ahead.
Okay. I was going to suggest taking a look at the Energize incentive program out in California, which I think is facilitated by CALSTART. And they do have different funding lanes. It's not just for electric vehicles. There is a funding lane for hydrogen fuel cell infrastructure as well. I've not looked into that in great detail, but I know there are several other sort of multi-state and regional charging infrastructure corridor planning efforts underway. California, Oregon, and Washington are working on one such project, and then there's actually two underway on the East Coast, and I know sites are being evaluated for what you described, Jesse, as faster levels of charging. 350 kilowatt is likely to be the minimum for some of these interstate travel locations. And then there's also the up to 1 megawatt charging standard, which is in development. And I know technology providers and charging infrastructure developers are working quickly to bring that to market.
Yeah. Yeah, Jeremy, thank you for pitching Energize, and thank you for pitching the hydrogen lane, because it opens today. I'll say it for the third time. My team will be excited to say that. So that I've said that. So yeah, to your point, I think that Energize is a great one to look at. I think it does show that there is significant opportunities. But to Jesse, to your point on how when we look at how we need to build out corridors, right? So in the evolution of just going from the hub and spoke model that you said to actually moving to regional, then national, then intranational, we do need to have an emphasis on corridors. And I think the first thing, again, for people to just keep in mind is that freight really knows state boundaries, right? And it also doesn't know utilities. So when we think about how to connect corridors, we almost have to take a step back and say, how do we move goods and people and services in the United States, and realize that, if my team leads the I-95 project from Canada all the way down, I-95, we're looking at all the potential sites that need to be developed along the way from I-90 for I-95. We're also managing and leading the I-10, right, from the Port of Houston over through California. And what we really do encourage is for state offices to get together. If you have a major corridor, especially looking at the national strategy that runs through your state, talk to the states that are also on that corridor, and get input, get ideas from the operators that travel there. You see their trucks, they're out there. And together with the other states, how to identify where, and also what needs kind of, what does that corridor need, right? Are the utility costs high? Should you be working then with your utilities on the tariff that best fits? Is the cost of land high? Should you be looking at potentially green enterprise zones, right? Where you could have established zero emission transportation built, but then you're also giving tax credits for it. So working within your state to identify how to incentivize properly, and then working with other states along the way, you will see those corridors build out. It's just a reminder, though, that freight and logistics, they really don't just operate within your state, and that coordination across is key.
That is a great reminder. Thank you. I don't see any additional questions in the chat, and I know we're almost at time, so I'm going to take this opportunity to just thank you both again for your time today and for sharing your expertise. It is very much appreciated. I will also let all of the states who are on the call know that you can expect a request for information out from NASEO here in the next few weeks. I'm hoping by the end of this month. So if you are interested in receiving support from NASEO, I mentioned we have funding to support a handful of states with this planning around corridors, putting together an action plan, convening stakeholders, figuring out what federal funding you can leverage. That is work that will be kicking off in earnest here very soon. And so keep an eye out for that. If you're not on our week ahead email list, get on there because we'll make sure it's included, and I'll be sure to make sure everyone who signed up for these webinars gets that information as well. Any final thoughts from our presenters before we end?
I just want to say thank you for the opportunity. Really excited about that RFP that's coming out. If any states need any support or need any, resource or whatever, feel free to contact us or look us up on the web. So thank you, Jesse. Thank you, NASEO.
Thank you, Stacey. We will definitely take you up on that. I'm sure I will be pointing states in the direction of resources from both your organizations. And if you haven't yet seen, I did put the link for NESCAUM's action plan into the chat earlier, so take a look at that as well. Jeremy?
Yeah, I was just going to say thanks for the opportunity to participate. And if states have any questions about the Advanced Clean Trucks regulation and what it might mean for penetration in your state, happy to take any and all questions and, provide resources to help address questions. So thanks again for the opportunity. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. And everyone also keep an eye out for future webinars. Our next one will likely be focused on planning for that new electric load from all of these charging stations we're going to build together. We've got some great experts who have developed some tools that I think will very much be useful to states. So we'll share information as soon as that's available, but hoping to schedule that webinar for late May-ish. And hopefully I'll see some of you at ACT Expo in a few weeks. For now, we'll close there. Thank you everyone for joining. We'll see you soon.